Hey everyone, how's it going? Brian here with another Java game programming tutorial. So the last time we left off, we allowed our towers to re-aim their shots after they defeat an enemy. You can see they look towards the next enemy that spawns in the next wave, and so they're not constantly useless shooting in the void at nothing. Now, we had a vote 2 episodes back where I asked you guys if you wanted to do new enemy types or new tower types next. And I'll post the results here in the video in a pie chart form. I believe the tower types won by like 66% or so, which is cool. It's pretty fun. Tower types are definitely, I don't want to say harder, but they're definitely more intricate. There's a lot more things you need to change between different towers as opposed to different enemies. I mean, different enemies is pretty much just a new texture, speed, and health, right? I mean, you might have like flying enemies or, you know, special underground enemies or something, that'd be different. But for the most part, enemies is just texture, health, and speed. Towers, you need to change the entire, you know, firing mechanism. Like what if you have like a laser versus a rocket versus a cannon? So what we're going to do this episode is we're not going to get, you know, totally into new towers yet. So I want to set that up, you know, ahead of time so you guys know. By the end of this episode, we won't have a new tower, but we're making changes that will kind of set us up for the future in a good situation for creating multiple new towers and multiple new enemies a lot easier than we would have otherwise. So to start off, the reason we're doing this in its own episode is it's one of those episodes where nothing in the game is going to change, but like I said, it's going to make us set us up for the future, you know, good foundation. We're going to go to our data package here, right click, go to new, and don't go to new class. We've done that every time before, but this time we're going to go to a new interface. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, we could have done class and just kind of rewritten the stuff, but just, you know, new interface. And what this is it's similar to a class, as in we're going to have this window. I just pointed at my screen with my finger. I realize you guys can't see that. We're going to have this window where we write our code, just like usual, right? But we're going to use it in a different way. So first, let's name it. And the idea for this interface is it's going to encompass the very basic roots and methods of what it means to be something that is going to be drawn in our game, something that exists in our game world. So not like our editor, which doesn't actually exist in the game world, that's just something that we're using, more like our enemies and our towers. So I'm going to name this entity, which is a pretty common name for this interface. And what we're going to do in here, you can see it says public interface entity, which is different from our other stuff where it says public class. So in our entity interface, all we're going to do is list methods that we want everything in our game world to have. And so this is really helpful for organization and making sure that everything is nice and uniform. And like in the future, if we want to create, say, an obstacle, you know, that's something that's not an enemy or a tower, but it might exist in the future in our game. We can just create a class for obstacle and say it inherits from entity, and all of those methods we need will automatically be added to it. We don't need to actually type it out manually. So yeah, I realize if you've never worked with interfaces before, this might seem kind of confusing and weird, but I can almost guarantee that by the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly what it is we're trying to do here. It's pretty straightforward once we actually type it out. Alright, so the way we're going to use the entity interface is a little bit different from the way we use classes. So for our classes, like say wave, we have a wave class. And every class we've created so far has a constructor, right? Where you just say public and then the name of the class, and then you say what that class requires for it to work. So when we want to make a new wave, in this case in the wave manager class is where we do that, we say, you know, wave equals new wave, and then we pass in what we need for the wave to do its job, which in this case is an enemy type, a spawn time, and the amount of enemies per wave. Once we pass that in, we create a new instance of the wave class that pretty much just does whatever waves do. Okay? That's how all of our classes have worked so far, where we create an instance, we create one specific scenario of that class that then does whatever that class does. An interface is different. There is no constructor. All we're doing is creating an outline of what other classes should follow that use this interface. So let's just get into it then. Let's do public. Actually, this should be float get x, public float get y, public void set x, and that takes a float named x, public void set y, public void update, and public void draw. Now we could add more to this in the future. In fact, we probably will. This is just off the top of my head. What methods everything needs in our game that exists in the game world that we draw and that updates. We can actually add width and height as well. So let's say public, I believe we do integers mostly. Public int get width, public int get height, and then after x and y we'll say public void set width, which takes an int of width, and public void set height, int height. Okay, so now we have all of the methods that we need in our entity interface. You can go ahead and delete that line right there. Now let's try it out. Let's go to our, well first, let's go to our editor class, just as an example. And the way you implement the entity interface is we just say implements entity. So you don't need to import it up here or anything like that. You just say implements and then the name of the interface, and you'll see we have an error now. And the error is that we're missing certain methods that the entity interface says that we require. So editor, we're not actually going to add these because that was just an example of what not to do, or not what not to do, but what won't work. The entity interface will not apply to our editor because it's not an object in the game. Let's go to, and by the game I mean, you know, in the game world. Let's go to our enemy class. This will use the interface. So implement entity. And now we have an error because we don't have certain methods that entity requires us to have. So here we have update. Now obviously we do have update in our enemy class, right? Because we call update over and over right here, but it's uppercase. So this is going to help us also go back through our code and make sure everything is correctly capitalized and all nice and uniform. Next will probably be draw. Go back up here, the error. Draw, yep. I believe draw is at the very end of this class. Draw. And you know, possibly next episode or the one after it is, I keep saying we're going to do an episode where we go back and kind of like clean up our code a little bit. That is definitely coming very, very soon in the future. If not next week, then probably the week after that. Because, you know, this should be lowercase and we're just going to go through our methods, make sure they're all named properly, and maybe do a little bit of optimization. You know, we have got some parts of our code that aren't as efficient as they could be. So maybe do that next week as well. But for now, we're just going to do what we need to do for our entity interface here. And now it works. And it works because we already have the other methods that we need at the bottom of this enemy class. We already have draw here, get width, get height, set height, get x, set x. We already have all of those. And so this makes it easy because we know that any class that implements entity, we can rely on to get certain variables. We know they have an x, a y, width, height, and an update and a draw method. So let's go ahead and go to our, well actually I was going to say go to our tower cannon class, but what we should do is the way we're going to make our towers, our different tower types, go ahead and make a new class and just name it tower. And so kind of similar to entity, entity is an interface, and what we're going to do is with our tower class, we're going to turn it into an abstract class. Okay, but for now, we're just going to implement, implements entity. And so this will probably be next episode where the plan is tower, we just made, is going to implement entity, and then all of our different tower types, like say we have tower cannon, maybe we have a laser tower, rocket tower, etc., they're going to extend this tower class. So I know this is an interesting episode because we're really shaking things up here. We're trying to save us a lot of work in the future by setting up a good groundwork that can easily allow us to take code we've already written. So for instance, in our entity class, which I'll show you right now, this is the magic of our entity interface. This arrow right here, you can scroll over it and just click Add Unimplemented Methods. And these are all the methods that we need, and we just can fill these out to make sure that they work for our tower class. Hit save, and the error is gone. So we don't actually need to type all of these method names. We do need to change what they return and how they work, but all the names are already there. We can make sure that we have every method we need for it to be a working entity in our game. So now it's just a matter of filling out the appropriate actions for each method, which I guess we'll do in this episode. We'll do that right now, and then we'll probably wrap it up. We can get rid of this @ override here. We can in fact do that in almost all these cases. And I'm hitting Control D, by the way. Control D will delete the entire line that you're currently selecting. And now let's go through these. This makes it a lot easier because we're just kind of like filling out a checklist, if you will, instead of just like thinking, oh, did I, implement the X method, or in the future, like, how come we can't get the, width of the tower? Oh, we never made a method for that. Now we know exactly what every entity has in our game, and we can reliably call it in a uniform way from everywhere else in our game. So let's go ahead and for get X, we'll need to make the variables for these as well. So let's go ahead and up here, say private float X and Y, private int width and height. What's going on here? Private float. Oh, that was silly of me. There we go. Make sure you make it inside of the actual class. Up here is just our imports and our package. So private float X and Y, private int width and height. And now we can just say for get X, return X. And there's actually a way where we could have this auto fill out as well, but we'll probably do that next time. Get width is return width. Get height. It's good to exercise those typing fingers anyways. Return height. And then for set X, say this dot X, as soon as it loads, equals X. Set Y, this dot Y equals Y. Width is this dot width equals width. This dot height equals height. Update, we're going to leave blank. Draw, we're going to leave blank. So, I know this might have been the most confusing episode in a while. Let's go to our wave class because we've changed the name of our update and draw to lowercase. So just make that lowercase. Get rid of that error. Yeah, I realize this is definitely a lot different from what we've done previously. I might make a little bonus video that's unlisted that kind of explains this in a bit more detail, which I'll eventually add in an annotation to the screen in this video. But just so we're clear, just so everyone understands the idea behind what we're doing, is we created an interface named entity. And when we want to use that, we say implements entity in another class. So in this case, our tower class. Now we're going to turn this tower class into something else. So instead of an interface, we're going to make it something called an abstract class. And the way that works is then for all of our little, sub-towers, all our tower types, like laser, rocket, arrow, cannon, they can inherit the methods from this tower class. So you know how we just had to fill out, get X, get Y, get width, get height. When we make, say, our rocket tower next episode or whenever we do that, we don't need to write these methods anymore because we know that it extends the tower class. So that's next time. I don't want to overload you guys with a bunch of new information more than I have to. But end of the day, entity is an interface. We implement it. Tower is going to be an abstract class, which we can call methods from. And that is going to set us up for easily making new tower types. Because before, look at our tower cannon class. Look at all this code just to shoot a cannonball at an enemy. This can all be simplified into pretty much probably a third, if not less, of this class when we make a new tower. Because we're already going to have all these methods made for us in the tower superclass right here. Anyway, if you have questions, ask them in the comments, and I'll get to you guys. I know it's a little confusing. And I think that's it for this week. So, thank you for watching. Thank you to everyone who voted on Patreon. Rock in the vote. Democracy works. And I will see you guys next time.